Angelica got up from the couch and looked hopefully at the doctor, but she shook her head negatively. Unfortunately, Angelica, you are not pregnant. The doctor began to fill out the woman's medical records, and at the same time she named the medicines she and her husband should have taken to increase their chances of conception. Tears streamed down Angelica's face. But we've already tried everything. I'm just desperate. For 5 years, I've been going to the pharmacy every month and hoping to buy a pregnancy test, but all to no avail. The doctor came over to Angelica, put her arms around her, and, after handing her a glass of water, tried to calm her down. You have a chance to get pregnant on your own, albeit small, but there is a chance. But I would recommend that you think about other options. Angelica sobbed. She and Peter had been married for 5 years, but the pregnancy never came. All these years she had gone to her doctor with hope and left her with sobs. And so it was today. The young woman silently took her bag and left the office. The doctor looked sadly after her and sighed again. She sympathized with her and felt pity for her. Having hardly calmed down, Angelica went to work. She worked as a paramedic in the ambulance. It was warm and sunny outside. Birds were singing everywhere, and Angelica, looking at the blue sky, suddenly believed that her dream will surely come true. And at that very time, Peter, her husband, was traditionally sitting in his mother's kitchen, silently listening to her and thinking about his own things. His mother had always been against his marriage to Angelica, and after the wedding, her dislike for her daughter-in-law had only increased because she could not get pregnant. During her son's weekly visits, the woman constantly started conversations with him about his relationship, thinking that he should get a divorce immediately. You should find a normal woman for yourself. How many times are you going to visit clinics? You're a healthy man, and I already want to see my grandchildren, said the mother emotionally, pushing a plate of pancakes towards her son. Eat, son, eat, and listen to your mother. Peter loved his mother and was afraid to cross her. He was distracted from his thoughts by the sound of a text message. Looking at the screen, he glanced up at the woman with a smile. Mum, I promise that soon everything will change, he said, and after finishing his tea, he kissed his mother goodbye and went to work. Meanwhile, a message came to Angelica's phone too. Seeing that it was from her best friend Cheryl, Angelica opened it and immediately, dumbfounded, she saw pictures of Peter and Cheryl passionately kissing. Under the photo was the text, "He's mine, we're happy, and unlike you, I can give birth to his child." Angelica couldn't believe her eyes. She did not understand how Cheryl, with whom she had always shared the most intimate things, could do such a thing. Moreover, her husband's betrayal did not settle in her mind at all. "Angelica, is everything all right? A call came in," said Scott, Angelica's colleague, but the woman didn't answer, staring at one point. "Do you hear me?" "Oh, I'm fine. Just thinking," said Angelica, barely holding back from crying. They quickly got in the car and drove to the place of the call. There they saw an elderly man lying motionless in the bushes. Scott assumed it was some vagrant who had been drunk and fallen asleep, so he did not even want to approach the man. But Angelica, running up to the old man, saw that he was quite decently dressed and did not look like he was drunk. She quickly looked him over and shouted, "There's a heart attack! A stretcher, quick!" Thanks to Angelica's quick reaction, the man was rescued. It turned out to be a local artist, Mr. Murray. When Angelica's shift was over, she decided to visit the elderly man. She looked at him warmly and asked him how he was feeling.
"Thank you, dear," whispered the man with an effort. "I probably would be dead if not for you."
Angelica smiled embarrassedly and said she was just doing her duty.
"Your eyes are so sad, Angelica. Is something wrong?"
asked the elderly man sympathetically, taking her hand. And then Angelica seemed to burst. Tears streamed from her eyes, and she told about everything that happened to her. But then, having come to her senses, she apologized, and wishing the man a speedy recovery, ran out of the ward. The day's work was done, and she had to find the strength to go home. When she entered her apartment, she immediately, without saying a word to her husband, began to gather her things. He apparently did not know about the text Angelica had received, so he asked her in surprise where she was going so late with her suitcase. "Peter, I know everything. Be happy with Cheryl," she said as she headed for the exit. Peter didn't even try to justify himself. And why should he? He had felt happy around Cheryl for a year now, and just could not find the strength to tell his wife about it all. As soon as the door closed behind Angelica, Peter immediately called Cheryl, praising her for her resourcefulness, and reported that his wife had finally left, and even without a scandal. Angelica rented an apartment and tried to learn to live again. She visited Mr. Murray daily, who was getting better. One day, Angelica brought him pencils and papers, and Mr. Murray started to draw the portraits. Watching, Angelica always admired his skill. When Mr. Murray was discharged, he offered Angelica to move in with him.
"I'm all alone. My wife died, and I've never had children, and you're like a daughter to me now. There's only me, my dog, and my paintings in the big apartment. We'll live together. It's cheerier like this."
Angelica thought a little and agreed, because she had become very attached to the kind elderly man, and besides she was very lonely in a rented apartment. Autumn was approaching and everything was going on. Angelica's pain from separation from her husband was almost dulled. She went to work every day, and Mr. Murray continued to paint his pictures. In the evenings they talked, drank tea, and the artist tried his best to cheer up the girl by telling her funny stories. One day the doorbell rang, and Angelica saw on the threshold a boy of about 12 in a shabby jacket with unwashed blonde hair and big green eyes. He looked frightened at Angelica and asked for Mr. Murray. Seeing the boy, the man rejoiced. "Come in, my friend. It's been a long time since you've been here. Meet Angelica. She's like a daughter to me." "My name is Ben," said the boy, embarrassed. "Pleased to meet you." "Did you have a fight with your father again?" asked Mr. Murray sympathetically. "He's not my father. And anyway, I left home," answered Ben defiantly. Angelica set the table, and the boy, greedily eating hot soup, told her that his mother had died long ago and his constantly drunken stepfather was keeping him from living in peace. Angelica felt sorry for him, and Mr. Murray, after some thought, suggested that Ben take his things out of his home and move in with them. At first, Ben could not believe his happiness and even cried, and then he ran home to pack his things. And so they all started living together. At work, Angelica's colleagues did not understand and laughed at the fact that such a young woman lived with an old man. She tried to explain that he was like a father to her, but they kept making dirty jokes about her, and Angelica decided not to react. Her mother, who lived in a village near the city, also judged Angelica and, without even listening to her explanations, simply stopped communicating with her. It seemed to Angelica that the whole world had turned away from her. But she did not despair. She was happy at Mr. Murray's place, and she became attached to Ben as well. Time passed,
and by the middle of winter, Angelica had already forgotten all about Peter. Only once, on her way to work, she accidentally bumped into him on the street. Cheryl held his hand and cooed something in his ear. Angelica walked past in silence. Peter wanted to say hello, but didn't dare, and Cheryl only snorted. It was her fault. She should have taken care of her husband, not stayed at work all days and nights. 2 years passed. Angelica was busily preparing for Christmas, bought gifts for Mr. Murray and Ben, and served the holiday table with the boys' help. They were sitting around the Christmas table, remembering how fate had brought all 3 of them together. "My dears, I had no kids, but I love you as my own," said Mr. Murray, with tears of joy in his eyes. They hugged each other, enjoying how good and peaceful they felt together. It was the best evening, and Mr. Murray fell asleep with a serene smile on his face. And in the morning, Angelica discovered that he had died of a stopped heart. The girl was inconsolable and could not imagine how she and Ben would now live without their best friend. After the funeral, Angelica again felt an emptiness in her heart, and besides, their usual world had shattered. "Angelica, where will we go now?" said Ben sadly, with tears in his eyes. "I'll definitely figure something out, I promise. We'll rent an apartment, then we'll see." Angelica began to gather her things, and, opening the nightstand, found there a strange envelope. When she opened it, she was stunned, and tears ran down her cheeks again. It was a will in which Mr. Murray had bequeathed the apartment to her and Ben. "Ben, we're staying," she whispered through her tears. "This is our apartment now." Time heals. Angelica still worked as a paramedic. Ben went to school, and in the evenings they remembered with longing their kind friend and how happy they had been together. Ben's stepfather had forgotten all about Ben, and Angelica thought more and more about adopting the boy. One day, while walking with Barky, Mr. Murray's dog, Angelica saw a young artist in the park. She stopped, looking thoughtfully at the image on the canvas. "My name is Javier." The young man held out his hand affably. "Are you interested in paintings?" Angelica smiled. The guy was tall, thin, in his 30s. She explained that he reminded her of one good man, and told him about Mr. Murray and the paintings he had left behind after his death. Hearing this sad story, Javier asked Angelica embarrassedly to show him his paintings. The woman agreed, and they headed off in the direction of her and Ben's house. On the way, they were talking, and Angelica felt some kind of incredible energy coming from this guy. She was unable to stop talking to him, and Javier felt the same way. When Javier saw the paintings, he was delighted with Mr. Murray's talent and suggested that Angelica immediately start an exhibition of his work and then sell them. Angelica thought about it and agreed, as she also believed that the artist's creation should be available to people. They talked late into the evening, and it seemed to Angelica that she and Javier had known each other for many years. The next day she waited impatiently for his call, and when he called and asked her out, she felt a long-forgotten excitement and realized that she had fallen in love. Javier was waiting for her at the appointed place with a bouquet of daisies and was also very excited. He had not slept all night long thinking of Angelica, who had suddenly and firmly sunk into his soul. He realized that he fell in love with this gentle, kind, and extraordinary young woman. They spent the whole day together and no longer wanted to be apart for even a minute. "And don't worry,
As soon as we get married, we'll adopt Ben, said Javier confidently. Angelica was surprised and looked at the guy with an amorous look. He held her tightly to him and felt her heart beat fast. 6 months passed. Angelica was walking down the street when suddenly her phone rang. "Yes, my love," she said joyfully. "I got the papers and I'm running to Ben's school to make him happy." As she approached the schoolyard, she immediately saw Ben and called out to him. He ran up, wondering what she was doing here in the middle of the school day. Angelica gave the boy an envelope. Ben, not understanding anything, unwrapped the papers and, shrieking with joy, almost strangled Angelica in his arms. It was the paperwork for his adoption. Now they were a complete family. He, Angelica, and Javier. A few months later, Angelica was sitting on her doctor's couch again, staring at her in awe. "Angelica, I have wonderful news. You're pregnant. 6 weeks, according to the ultrasound," exclaimed the doctor joyfully. Tears flowed down Angelica's cheeks again, but this time from happiness. And in the spring, Javier and Angelica had a beautiful daughter. Life of their new family was finally settled.